In this video, we're going to step through the process of setting up a new Unity project. I'll also go through making sure that our Unity is hooked up correctly to Visual Studio so that we can open up scripts to edit them, and a couple extra things to take a look at when we start a new project and need to set up Unity correctly. First things first, make sure that whenever you're opening up a Unity project, either one that's already created or a new one, we always want to use the Unity Hub. Never open up an already created Unity project by double-clicking on a file to open up the editor. Always locate it through the Unity Hub to make sure that there's nothing wrong with the project. This will guarantee that you are working in a project that can be edited and that there's nothing going on wrong with your Unity editor too. So I'm going to double-click Unity Hub, and we get to the projects window. First thing to check when you have the Unity Hub open is to make sure that you do have a license, because if you're working on a school computer, it's possible that you're going to need to log in through your own user so that you can get a license to use it at school. So if we look here in the upper right, we should see initials there. If there's nothing there, if it's a little picture of like a person, that means you do need to log in and get a Unity license. So if we click that and it doesn't say anything, we should be able to go to Manage Licenses, and you should be able to log in with that. And once you log in, you need to click Activate New License and go through the steps of setting that up. Once you are logged in with a license, if you need to do that, we can just click the back button from Preferences and we can open up a project. To create a new project, just click the New button, and you want to make sure that you are working in the same version of Unity that we have installed on the school computers. It might be different than the one shown in this video depending on which semester you're working in. Most likely it has been updated, so while mine says 2019.1.4, you're probably going to be working in a different version, but you need to make sure that you are working in the correct version because Unity does not like to transfer between different versions. Most likely your instructor also has put this information somewhere on Blackboard. If you do want to check which one you're making a new one for, that's just this drop-down arrow. I have multiple versions installed, so I probably want to make sure that I am working in the correct version so that my Unity project will run on a school computer. For this course, we are always going to be working with the 3D one. We also need to make sure that we're putting it in a good location. If we click on the the three dots right here, we can change that location, and if you're working on a Wake Tech Lab computer, you want to put it on the D drive. Never put it on the C drive, never put it on the desktop, because you will lose your project if the computer reboots, and sometimes it might unexpectedly reboot on you if you crash your computer hard enough. The computer I'm recording on does not have a D drive, so I'm just going to be working on the C drive. But again, if you're working on a Wake Tech computer, don't put it on the C drive, put it on the D drive. Next, we need to give the project a name, and this is going to be for the entire single project. So each new homework assignment will be a different project, and you should be given a naming convention inside the write-up for the project. Most likely it's going to be something like your last name, and then the name of the project type, like, let's say project 1, or maybe it'll be like project 1 and then last name, whichever way your instructor tells you to call your projects. Then we will hit the Create button. This step will probably take a few moments. You'll see a Unity splash screen. Mine is on the other monitor, so you don't see it, but it can take a little bit for these projects to actually open. My video's almost open. I'm sorry, my project's almost open. I had paused the video between. And when it opens, it should look something like this. So a couple things to check out before we get started is, first of all, I prefer the default layout. If for some reason you're working on a computer and the layout is a little bit weird, or if you try to mess with the layout and it ends up in a way that you don't want it to be, you want to fix it, just go to Window, Layouts, and choose the default, and it'll go back to this look. Another thing to look at is I suggest to do a better window tint when you're in play mode. So if you hit the play button by default, it just kind of is like a slightly dimmer gray. And if you make any changes during play, they don't keep. So when you turn this off, if like you altered anything in your scene, it's going to go back to the way it was before you hit play. And then you could accidentally lose a lot of work that way. And we also want to make sure that Visual Studio is hooked up correctly to our project. So I'm going to go to Edit and Preferences. And the first one we can check is the external tools. And if your thing is too small, we can always click and drag and make it bigger. It might accidentally pop up in another monitor if you're working in a dual monitor environment. But underneath external tools, what we want to make sure is that the external script editor is set to Visual Studio 2000 or Visual Studio Community or whatever your Visual Studio currently is at this time. If it's trying to do something else or it's not actually hooked up, you're going to have to help it find where it is, and you most likely will have to Google the location of how to find where this file is, but hopefully by default it is set to this. But if not, you're going to have to fix it before you can edit any scripts. To change the color of your play window, we can go to the Colors tab, still in Preferences. And what we want to change is right here, this Play Mode Tint. By default, it's this grayish color, and it's not really obvious when you're in play. So I like to make it like a nice bright magenta so that I know I'm playing and there's no question about it. So I'm going to change the color, and then I can close this all down, and I hit play, and I get this nice pink outline, so I know I'm in play and I don't accidentally leave that on by accident. Some other things with setting up our project is if we know we're going to have certain assets such as scripts, prefabs, imported 3D objects, or anything like that, we can take the time to come down into our assets folder and make those. So I'm just going to right click, and I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to name it scripts. If you needed more, you could create more, like again, for like prefabs, imported 3D objects, materials, etc., etc. I'm going to then go in my scripts, and I do want to make a quick script just to also make sure Visual Studio is open and to kind of go through the steps of getting that ready. So I'm going to right click, create C# script, and I want to make sure that I name it right away. Do you see how it's highlighted in blue? I don't want to accidentally click off of that. I want to make sure I'm naming this at the start. So I'm just going to name this one UI controller, because maybe the script is going to be meant to control some UI objects in my scene. I should then be able to double click it and open it in Visual Studio. If it's the first time you're opening Visual Studio, it might take a couple minutes. You might have to log into Visual Studio as well. I'm already logged in. You shouldn't have to pay for this. If you're on a school computer, you should be able to log in with your Wake Tech credentials. So that's your Wake Tech email address. It's, whatever your name is, at my.waketech.edu, and the same password that you use to log in to check your email. We know that the script is hooked up to Unity correctly because it did open, and the other thing we should check is it should always say in the upper left right here where it says Assembly C#, that means it's talking to the Unity editor correctly. If it says something like miscellaneous up here, something is wrong. It should never say miscellaneous, it should say Assembly C#. If it says miscellaneous, the first thing you should try is closing out the editor and reopening it to see if it was just a quick blip. Sometimes it just happens where it unhooks itself from the editor. And the other thing to try if it's not working is to go back to that edit preferences, external tools, and double check that it does say Visual Studio. That should fix that problem. This is most likely the culprit. If that opening, close and reopen doesn't fix it, this is probably wrong. So I would go in and double check this. The last thing I'm going to do before I get started, I guess I don't want to actually, I'm going to start doing UI in another video, but the last thing to do to set up the scene is I do want to make sure that my script is hooked up to an object in the scene. And I'm just going to do that by putting it on an empty game object. You always want to make sure that you're putting your scripts onto an object in the scene if it's meant to run in a scene. And the easiest way to do that, I'm going to right click in my hierarchy and create empty. This is just going to make a generic blank game object. So the only thing on there is this transform. And I don't want to end up with a scene with a bunch of game object 1, 2, 3, etc. So I am going to rename this. And since this is going to end up being the container to hold my UI controller script, because it's going to manipulate my UI objects, I'm going to just rename it to UI controller. And I'm going to then just click and drag and drop my script on there. Now that that is on this object in the scene, when it comes time to actually code something in this script, I hit play, the script will actually run. If you do not place your script on an object in your hierarchy, that script does not run when you hit the play button. So it's very important to make sure that your script is on an object. We don't want to put it on the main camera because we might forget it's there. We also don't want to put it on our light because that wouldn't make any sense. So I just created a new empty, renamed it to the same as that script, and dropped that script on there. So once you're at this stage, you should be pretty good to go to get started. And if you need to continue on with setting up your canvas and some simple UI, there are other videos dealing with that, as well as how to do a build and submitting that.